Ethan Carter stepped out of his car, the gravel crunching under his worn boots. The old Victorian house loomed before him, a silhouette against the fading light. Home. He carried with him the weight of memories, both fond and faded, like old photographs tucked away in a dusty album. The porch creaked a familiar welcome as he ascended the steps. Each step seemed to echo with the ghosts of laughter and hushed whispers from his past. It had been years since he'd last crossed this threshold, years spent trying to outrun the shadows of his lineage. But some bonds, like the scent of old wood and the echo of time, could not be severed. He found his grandfather Samuel in his usual spot by the fireplace, a frail silhouette against the flickering flames. The years had weathered him, etched lines upon his face like cracks in a forgotten monument. Yet his eyes, though clouded with age, still held a spark of the man Ethan remembered. "Ethan," Samuel rasped, his voice a dry whisper, "you came." His words held a mixture of surprise and a dark undercurrent that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. It was the tone of a man who had long made peace with his solitude, a solitude that Ethan's arrival had abruptly shattered. Ethan settled into the worn armchair across from his grandfather, accepting the glass of amber liquid offered. The scent of wood smoke and something faintly metallic hung in the air, a disquieting aroma that he couldn't quite place. It tugged at the edges of his memory like a half-forgotten nightmare. "It's good to be back," Ethan lied, forcing a smile. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. The house felt heavy, burdened with a silence that seemed to hum with unspoken truths. It was the silence of secrets kept for far too long. He remembered childhood summers spent exploring the woods behind the house, the thrill of hide and seek among the towering trees. He remembered his grandfather's stories, tales spun from darkness and folklore, tales that had both fascinated and terrified him. But there were other memories too. Memories that surfaced like corpses in a stagnant pond. Flashes of fear, of hushed whispers and hurried goodbyes. The neighbors, their faces etched with worry, their eyes avoiding his own. And always the lingering scent of iron and decay clinging to the air like a shroud. The longer Ethan stayed, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It wasn't just the silence, nor the weight of his grandfather's gaze. It was something else, something insidious that seeped from the very foundation of the house. The stench hit him first, a wave of putrid sweetness that turned his stomach. It was the smell of rot, of something long dead and festering. It emanated from the basement door, a heavy oak door secured with a rusty padlock. He remembered his grandfather warning him, his voice raspy with an unspoken threat never to venture down there. Curiosity warred with apprehension. What secrets did those shadowed depths hold? What was his grandfather so desperate to conceal? The questions gnawed at him, fueled by the ever-present stench and the unsettling feeling that he was not alone in the house. He decided to confront his grandfather, to demand answers, but as he turned to face the old man, a sound stopped him in his tracks. It was a soft thud, followed by a muffled scraping sound coming from the direction of the basement door. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped him. Whatever lay hidden beneath the house was stirring, and it was hungry. Days turned into nights. Ethan tried to ignore the stench, the unsettling sounds from the basement. He told himself it was the old house settling, his imagination running wild. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. One afternoon, while searching for his grandfather's pipe, Ethan stumbled upon a hidden compartment in the attic. Inside, nestled amongst old books and cobwebs, lay a hunting knife. It was ornate, the handle carved with intricate designs. He picked it up, the metal cold against his skin. As he turned it over, his blood ran cold. Dried stains, the color of rust, but with a metallic tang that spoke of something far more sinister, marred the blade. The scent of iron, faint but unmistakable, wafted up to him. It was the same scent that clung to the air in the house, the scent that haunted his dreams. Ethan's hand trembled as he placed the knife back in its hiding place. His mind raced, piecing together fragmented memories. whispers from his childhood. The neighbors had always whispered about his grandfather, about his strange ways, his reclusive nature. Now those whispers morphed into screams of warning in Ethan's ears. Driven by a growing sense of dread, Ethan began to explore the house with renewed purpose. He found himself drawn back to his grandfather's study, a room filled with the scent of old paper and forgotten memories. It was there, in a dusty corner, that he stumbled upon a stack of old newspapers. His heart pounded in his chest as he skimmed through the yellowed pages. Each headline screamed of tragedy, of lives cut short, of people vanishing without a trace. Local farmer vanishes, no sign of foul play. Young woman disappears from hiking trail. Another missing person case baffles authorities. The dates spanned decades, but a chilling pattern emerged. Each disappearance had occurred within a 5-mile radius of the house, and each victim had vanished without a trace. The articles offered no answers, only speculation and a growing sense of unease. Ethan's gaze fell upon a photograph accompanying one of the articles. A young woman, her face frozen in a smile, stared back at him. Her eyes seemed to hold a flicker of recognition, a plea for help that transcended time. He recognized her. She had been their neighbor years ago. She had vanished one summer evening, never to be seen again. The locked shed stood at the edge of the property, shrouded in shadow even during the day. Ethan had always been drawn to it as a child, his curiosity piqued by the forbidden nature of the place. But his grandfather had forbidden him from ever going near it. Now, fueled by his suspicions, Ethan approached the shed with a mix of trepidation and grim determination. The air hung heavy around it, thick with the cloying scent of decay and something else. Something metallic that made his stomach churn. The padlock securing the door was old but sturdy. Ethan fumbled with the lock, his hands slick with sweat. The sound of the metal scraping against metal seemed to echo through the silence, amplified by his racing heart. Finally, with a groan, the lock gave way. Hesitantly, Ethan pushed the door open. The hinges protested with a shriek that sent a shiver down his spine. The interior was dark and cramped, the air thick with dust, and the overpowering stench of decay. Ethan covered his mouth and nose with his sleeve, his eyes struggling to adjust to the gloom. Ethan's heart pounded as he stepped inside the shed. The stench was unbearable, a mix of decay and chemicals. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light. He fumbled for his flashlight, his fingers trembling. The beam cut through the darkness. It was then that he saw it. A shape beneath rotting wood and rusted tools, a shape that made his blood run cold. It was a human hand, pale and waxy, fingers curled into a claw. Ethan stumbled back, catching on a loose floorboard. He fell to his knees, transfixed by the discovery. As his eyes adjusted, he realized it wasn't just a hand, it was an entire arm, severed at the elbow. Suddenly, a noise from outside startled him. He scrambled to his feet. Someone was out there. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate. Panic surged. He had to get out of there. The discovery in the shed sent Ethan reeling. He stumbled back to the house, his mind a maelstrom of fear and disbelief. His grandfather, the man who had read him bedtime stories, the man who had taught him how to fish, was a monster, a murderer. He thought back to his childhood, to the strange occurrences he had dismissed as an overactive imagination. The whispers from the townsfolk, the fear in their eyes when they looked at him, at his grandfather, the times he had woken in the night to muffled screams coming from the woods, the metallic tang of blood in the air. It all made sense now. The missing persons reports, the locked shed, the stench of decay that permeated the house. His grandfather was a predator, and the house was his hunting ground. But how many victims were there, and how long had this been going on? Ethan felt a surge of anger, of betrayal, but more than anything, he felt a bone-chilling fear. He had stumbled upon a secret that was never meant to be unearthed, and now he knew too much. Ethan knew he couldn't stay in the house a moment longer. He had to get help, had to alert the authorities, but first he had to confront his grandfather, had to know the truth. He found Samuel in his study, sitting in his armchair by the fire. The old man looked up as Ethan entered, a flicker of something cold and calculating in his eyes. "You know, don't you?" Samuel asked, his voice raspy. Ethan said nothing. He couldn't speak. The words were trapped in his throat, choked by the fear that clawed at him. "You've seen what's in the shed," Samuel continued, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Curious, aren't you? Always have been." "Why?" Ethan finally choked out. "Why, grandfather?" Samuel chuckled, a low guttural sound that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. "Why?" he repeated. "Because it's in my blood, boy. It's who I am." Ethan's blood ran cold. "You're a monster," he whispered. Samuel's eyes hardened. "Monster!" he spat. "I am no monster. I am a predator, and you, my boy, are prey." Ethan stumbled back, his grandfather's words echoing in his ears. Prey. He was prey in his own childhood home. Fury battled with terror, urging him to act. His grandfather was a monster, but maybe, just maybe, he could stop him. The basement, the source of the stench, the whispers, the terror. He had to go back. The air grew heavy, thick with the metallic scent of blood and decay as he descended the creaking stairs. The musty darkness felt alive, closing in on him, threatening to swallow him whole. He fumbled for his flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom, revealing walls stained with dampness and something far more sinister. His gaze fell upon a section of the wall that seemed different, less worn, as if it had been concealed. With a grunt, he pressed against the wall, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing a hidden passage, the hidden room, the source of his nightmares. The room was small, cramped, the air thick with the dust of ages and the lingering scent of death. A single bare bulb cast a sickly yellow light, illuminating a scene that sent chills down Ethan's spine. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with gruesome trophies. Not the heads of hunted animals, but something far more terrifying. Human teeth, yellowed and cracked, filled glass jars. A withered hand, its fingers curled into a silent scream, rested on a dusty display stand. A necklace, its silver chain tarnished with time, held a locket containing a lock of hair, a woman's hair. Ethan's stomach churned, the bile rising in his throat. Each item told a silent story of suffering, a life brutally extinguished. His gaze fell upon a leather-bound journal lying open on a makeshift table. He picked it up, his hands shaking. The pages were filled with his grandfather's spidery handwriting, a chilling chronicle of each victim, their capture, their torment, their end. The words swam before his eyes, each one a searing brand against his soul. His grandfather wasn't just a monster. He was a meticulous chronicler of his own depravity. Ethan slammed the journal shut, his stomach clenching with disgust and burgeoning horror. His gaze swept around the room, taking in the gruesome tableau with a detached sense of disbelief. It was a nightmare, a macabre museum dedicated to death and despair. He noticed a map pinned to the wall, dotted with red X's. Each X marked a location, a chilling testament to the scope of his grandfather's crimes. But what chilled him to the bone were the two X's without dates, their locations eerily close to home, recent victims. The realization struck him like a physical blow. His grandfather wasn't finished, he was still hunting. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. He had stumbled upon a truth too monstrous to comprehend, a secret that threatened to consume him. He had to get out, had to warn someone, anyone. But as he turned to leave, a sound froze him in his tracks, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps descending the stairs. The basement door creaked open, sending a shaft of light into the darkness. Ethan's breath caught in his throat, his heart hammering against his ribs. He ducked behind a shelf, his body trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. "Ethan!" His grandfather's voice rasped, a chilling counterpoint to the silence. "I know you're down here." Ethan peeked cautiously from behind the shelf. Samuel stood at the bottom of the stairs, his face illuminated by the dim light. His eyes, usually clouded with age, were sharp, alert, a predatory gleam in their depths. "I knew you'd be curious," Samuel continued, a hint of amusement in his voice. "You always were such an inquisitive child." He took a step closer, his shadow stretching across the floor like a grasping hand. "You shouldn't have seen this, Ethan," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Now we have to play a different game." Section 5. Nowhere to run. Ethan's blood ran cold. A game? This wasn't a game. It was a nightmare. His own grandfather, the man who was supposed to protect him, was hunting him. He was trapped, the house a prison, the silence thick with menace. He had to escape. He watched as Samuel moved slowly towards the hidden room, his footsteps echoing ominously in the confined space. This was his chance. Ethan darted out from behind the shelf, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear Samuel's muffled curse as he realized Ethan had moved. He raced towards the stairs, his lungs burning, his legs screaming for respite. Ethan's foot caught on a loose floorboard, sending him sprawling onto the damp concrete floor. Section 6. A desperate plea. The basement door loomed before him, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. He fumbled for the handle, his fingers slick with sweat and adrenaline. The door swung open, revealing the dimly lit hallway beyond. "Grandfather, please," Ethan cried out, his voice hoarse with fear and desperation. Samuel stopped at the foot of the stairs, his eyes burning into Ethan. A humorless laugh escaped his lips, a chilling sound that echoed through the empty house. "Help?" he spat. "There's no help for what I am, Ethan. No help." Section 1. Hunted. Adrenaline surged through Ethan's veins, masking the pain in his ankle as he limped down the hallway. The house, once a sanctuary of childhood memories, had transformed into a hunting ground. Each creaking floorboard, each flickering shadow whispered of his grandfather's approach. Samuel was closing in, his gait slow but relentless, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. Ethan lunged for the living room, his lungs screaming for air. The front door, his only escape. He scrambled towards the heavy oak door, his hand reaching for the doorknob, locked. His grandfather had anticipated his every move, turning his childhood home into a meticulously crafted death trap. Panic welled up inside him, threatening to consume him. He whirled around, his back against the door, his eyes scanning the room for a weapon, an escape, anything. Samuel stalked closer, his shadow falling over Ethan like a suffocating blanket. He held the hunting knife, its blade glinting ominously in the dim light. "You cannot escape your blood, Ethan," Samuel rasped. His gaze fell upon a heavy fireplace poker leaning against the mantel. As Samuel raised the hunting knife, ready to strike, Ethan lunged. He grabbed the fireplace poker, its weight surprisingly reassuring in his hand. He swung it with all his might, the metal whistling through the air. The poker connected with Samuel's arm with a sickening thud. A cry of pain escaped his grandfather's lips as the knife clattered to the floor. Samuel stumbled back, clutching his arm, his eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and surprise. The momentary respite gave Ethan the opportunity he needed. Ethan dodged out of the way just in time, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he couldn't overpower his grandfather in a direct confrontation. He had to use his wits, his knowledge of the house, to outsmart him. He sprinted towards the grand staircase, his limp forgotten in the heat of the moment. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his eyes scanning the upper landing. There, partially hidden beneath an ornate rug, lay his only hope, a bear trap. A relic from his grandfather's hunting days, its jaws gaping open like a metal maw. "This ends now, Ethan!" Samuel roared from below. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he dragged the heavy rug inch by agonizing inch, revealing the deadly trap beneath. He had seconds, maybe less, before Samuel reached the top of the stairs. "Give up, boy," Samuel's voice echoed from the stairwell. Ethan ignored him, his focus solely on the task at hand. He gave the rug one final tug, sending it sliding across the polished wooden floor. The bear trap glinted in the dim light, its jaws sprung open, a silent invitation to a gruesome end. "You should have stayed away," Samuel hissed. Ethan dove to the side just as Samuel's foot landed on the rug. Ethan scrambled back, his blood turning to ice as he watched his grandfather thrash on the floor, his leg caught in the unforgiving jaws of the bear trap. The rug was stained crimson, the metallic scent of blood thick in the air. Samuel's eyes met Ethan's, and for a moment Ethan saw a flicker of something akin to regret in their depths, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a look of pure, primal rage. "You will pay!" Samuel gasped, each word punctuated by a surge of pain. Ethan wanted to look away, to erase the image of his grandfather, his own flesh and blood, broken and defeated. But something held him there, something in the way Samuel looked at him. The metallic scent of blood filled the air, a grotesque perfume that seemed to cling to Ethan's throat, choking him. His grandfather, his leg mangled in the bear trap, was no longer the imposing figure he once was. Yet, the fear remained, sharper, colder than before. Samuel's laughter, a broken, wheezing sound, cut through the silence. "You think this ends here?" he rasped. "You think you've won?" Ethan stared down at his grandfather, his stomach churning. The old man was right. This wasn't over. This house, steeped in blood and secrets, held him captive as surely as any chains. He was never alone. Panic clawed at Ethan's throat, threatening to consume him. He had to get out, had to escape the suffocating presence that had settled over the house. But his feet felt rooted to the spot, his body unwilling to move. The whispers grew louder, swirling around him like a vortex of despair. They spoke of his grandfather's victims, their voices echoing through the years, their agony seeping into the very walls of the house. He slammed his eyes shut, trying to block out the sound, the feeling of unseen hands reaching for him. "There's no escape," they hissed. "He is here." Driven by a desperate need to understand, to make sense of the madness that had enveloped him, Ethan stumbled towards his grandfather's study. The room, once a sanctuary of knowledge and comfort, now felt oppressive, the air thick with the weight of secrets. His gaze fell upon a large ornate mirror hanging above the fireplace. It had always been there, a silent sentinel watching over the room, its surface reflecting generations of his family. But now, as he stared into its depths, he saw something more, something sinister lurking beneath the surface. The reflection in the mirror wasn't his own. It was the face of his grandfather, younger, stronger, his eyes burning with a cold, calculating light. And behind him, barely visible in the shadows, stood another figure and another, each one bearing a chilling resemblance to Samuel. A long-forgotten memory flickered at the edge of Ethan's mind. His grandmother, her face pale and drawn, whispering to him about a curse, a darkness that had plagued their family for generations. The journal. He had to find the journal. Ethan whirled around, his eyes scanning the room, searching for the leather-bound book that held his grandfather's twisted confessions. He found it lying open on the desk, its pages filled with spidery handwriting, each word a testament to a life stolen, a soul extinguished. His heart pounded in his chest as he read, his stomach clenching with each horrifying detail. It wasn't just the murders, it was the way they were carried out, the rituals, the sacrifices. A horrifying realization dawned on him. He wasn't meant to escape. He was meant to take his place in the lineage of monsters. The whispers in the walls seemed to intensify, swirling around him, their voices filled with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Ethan sank to his knees, the weight of his family's sins crushing him. How could he possibly escape this? How could he outrun the darkness that flowed through his veins? He glanced back at the mirror, at the reflection of his ancestors watching him with cold, calculating eyes. They had been trapped in this cycle for generations, their souls bound to the house, their humanity consumed by the darkness. Was he destined to follow the same path? The whispers in the walls offered no comfort, only a chilling reminder of his heritage. But even as despair threatened to drown him, a flicker of defiance ignited within him. He would find a way to break the cycle, to end this reign of terror once and for all. A low rumble of thunder shook the house, the sound echoing through the silence like a warning. The storm that had been brewing all day had finally broken, unleashing its fury upon the world outside. Rain lashed against the windows, the wind howling like a banshee in the chimney. Time was running out. He could hear Samuel downstairs, his cries of pain replaced by a low, guttural growl. The bear trap wouldn't hold him for long. Ethan pushed himself to his feet, his gaze sweeping the room, searching for anything that could help him, protect him. He had to end this, for himself, for his family, for the innocent lives that had been lost. The house was alive, and it was calling to him. The rhythmic pounding grew louder, urging Ethan forward, guiding him through the labyrinthine corridors of the house. The storm raged outside, mirroring the tempest in his soul. Lightning illuminated stained glass windows, casting grotesque shadows that danced around him like phantoms. The air crackled with energy, and the scent of ozone mingled with the ever-present metallic tang of blood. He found his grandfather in the living room where their confrontation had begun. Samuel had managed to free himself from the bear trap, leaving a trail of blood and splintered bone in his wake. He was hunched over a trunk, his back to Ethan, his shoulders heaving. "You can't escape it, Ethan," Samuel rasped, his voice barely audible above the storm. "It's in your blood. It's who you are." Ethan's grip tightened on the fireplace poker, his knuckles white. He'd heard the words before, but now they held a terrifying weight. "I was waiting for the right moment," Samuel chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. He turned, a chilling smile spreading across his blood-stained lips. "To groom you, to mold you into my successor, but you—" He trailed off, his smile fading into a grimace of pain. "You forced my hand." The pounding in Ethan's ears reached a fever pitch, drowning out the storm, his grandfather's words. He saw the madness in Samuel's eyes, the hunger that mirrored the whispers of the house. He knew with a sickening certainty that his grandfather was beyond redemption. "I'm sorry, grandfather," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. He raised the fireplace poker, his hand trembling. "But this ends now." The blow was swift, brutal, a sickening thud of metal against bone. The light faded from Samuel's eyes, replaced by a vacant stare that spoke of a darkness finally extinguished. Ethan stumbled back, dropping the poker, his stomach churning. He had just killed a man, his own grandfather. But as the echoes of the blow faded, a strange sense of peace settled over him. The pounding in his ears subsided, replaced by an eerie silence. The house, as if sensing the shift in power, fell still. The storm outside seemed to calm, the wind dying down to a low moan. Ethan spent hours in a daze, cleaning up the scene and calling the authorities. No one questioned his story. Samuel Carter was a monster. As the sun rose, Ethan stood on the porch. Watching the police cars disappear, he knew the house would never be free. The echoes of pain were etched into its foundation. The sun glinted off something in the attic window, a hunting knife. Ethan knew some evils never die. He would be haunted by the echoes of the past, forever tethered to the house that held his family's darkest secrets.